Greetings, owners of fine luxury cardboard rectangles. We are here today to discuss Magic bannings and some of the factors that lead to the increased number of bannings that we are seeing. Some of you who are newer to Magic may not realize this, but Standard has had periods of tranquility where absolutely no bannings were necessary. And now in recent times, we've seen a number of high-profile bannings, with Oko obviously taking taking the cake as the biggest banning in recent memory in terms of just the scale at which Oko had spread out over the format and absolutely necessitated a ban. In some cases, I believe Oko represented 75% of the field. Like, the bannings that have been happening around now feel akin to the bannings back in the day of the original Mirrodin block, where there were some power issues. So this video is spawned basically by a Blogatog post, which, if you don't know, is Mark Rosewater's Tumblr, and some of the information that came up as a result. So what I want to do is I want to first of all go over the Blogatog post, and then we will talk about some of the factors that are leading to these bannings, because I've talked about them here or there in different parts, but we're going to kind of tie it all together using things that I've talked about and ideas from some other people as well. So it starts out with the question being asked to Rosewater. I want to ask a question about recent cards being banned, causing problems in some formats, but I don't want it to be critical in the negative way. I think it's important that we examine our failures as much as our successes. It feels like in the recent past, there has been several high-profile bannings and problematic cards being printed. Pushing the limits of card design is a good thing, but the frequency of these problem cards point to a more systemic problem. Thoughts? And this honestly is a fair question. As I've already mentioned, we have seen a ton of bannings recently. It's become a regular sort of thing. In fact, bannings have changed the way that ban announcements get made, where before they were more spread out, and now they could kind of just be dropped on us at any point. So Rosewater responds to his question. Here's the challenge. Players want us to be aggressive in pushing design boundaries, aka do new and splashy things. They want our new sets to have cards powerful enough to be played in the formats they play. They want the metagames to be complex enough that they don't get solved immediately, and they want nothing to break. And this doesn't seem like a unfair way of summarizing at least some of the desires of players. This isn't an all-encompassing list, but honestly, people do want the design boundaries pushed, totally. We do want to see, I love seeing new effects that I've never seen before, and big flashy effects are fantastic. Obviously, if they're too overpowered, that's going to be a big issue. They want the new sets to have cards powerful enough to be played in the formats they play. That makes sense. If you play Standard, automatically everything they make is Standard level, roughly. There'll be tiers in Standard, but you know what I mean. You can play with most of the stuff printed in Standard. But if you play Modern, Pioneer, Legacy, the older you go back with formats, the harder it is to break into that format. And by that I mean the harder it is for a new card to make progress into that format and be relevant, right? Because the further back you go with card sets, the more you have in terms of options. The more you have in terms of options, the more powerful options you'll have overall, which means the weaker ones are left off to the side, and the new ones have a new bar, like a higher bar to jump over, because as we aggregate more and more powerful cards, the power level required to even show up in a format gets higher and higher as well. If you're somebody who plays Modern or something like that, you want new cards. You want new things that are going to affect your deck. You want things that are going to make maybe some changes to the meta, but lead to a natural meta shift instead of an abrupt, like, everything has changed completely style shift. So there is a lot of specifics in that regard that people want. So they want the metagame to be complex enough that they don't get solved immediately, and want everything to function with nothing breaking. Now, expecting everything in Standard not to break, I don't think is a completely unreasonable expectation. Standard should be able to play with itself, that didn't sound right, without any sort of problems. Whereas with Modern and older formats, I understand if something comes along and is too broken for those formats, because when you design a standard set, like when you design a new Magic set, it's designed for standard. Older formats are mostly incidental, or that's how it's been for the majority of Magic's history, but more on that in a moment. Let us continue on with what he says here. So after summarizing the things that players want, I should say, he says, that's a big ask, but it's something we work very hard to deliver. Do we slip up from time to time? Yes, because it's a crazy hard thing to do. I am fully willing to admit that card design and balancing everything is going to be a difficult endeavor. There is no disputing that. Magic is a gigantic game with tons of moving parts and an ever-increasing complexity as we add more and more abilities, and sometimes crazy abilities. For example, look at what happened with Ikoria with both Mutate and Companion. Those are both fairly crazy abilities. That's not your first strike or double strike or ability counters level ability where you go, okay, this is what I'm accustomed to. Mutate is something wildly different. Companion is something wildly different. And each time a new set comes out, we've got a chance of getting something that's wildly different on top of like the regular stuff that we're used to. So it's understandable that this complexity is a real issue. So it continues on top of that. We can only focus on so many things. So we have to prioritize certain formats. Standard, booster draft, and sealed, plus commander for commander products, which means other formats are more reliant on other tools to solve problems. So obviously the other tools to solve problems are mostly banning and restricting, either saying you can't play with this card or you can play with one copy of this card. Limiting access to the offender cards is really the key way of doing it. The response continues. This doesn't mean we're not constantly improving our processes to try and be better. Obviously, our goal is to deliver everything above as often as possible. I like to be bluntly honest with all of you, though. We're never going to be perfect because what we're trying to do is just very difficult. Now, we have to add into this that Wizards design, like the way that they run their business, isn't ideal from the perspective of making sure that cards are designed like top tier. When it comes to Wizards hiring, they tend to hire people who love Magic the Gathering. Now that's completely understandable, but they take advantage of this so that they can pay less money to these employees. And when you pay less money, you don't always get the highest level of talent. So they don't have hiring policies that lead to getting the highest talent they can. Although also to balance that out, when it comes to designers, they do like designer searches and things like that. So they are able to find some competent individuals. Are they the best individuals? I don't know. But I do know that Wizards kind of cheaps out when it comes to employees and takes advantage of people loving the game. So you'll end up with a scenario where people will do more work than, like, if you're in love with Magic the Gathering and you're super stoked to be there, and then the company takes advantage of you and piles more and more work on you, you're going to try and do your best, but you can reach a burnout scenario. There's also something that I've been talking about a lot recently, which is the fire design, where before Wizards of the Coast had this sort of like balancing metric where they went, we're going to put this much power into a set and then balance it out, and it's like more powerful, less powerful, have kind of like an ebb and flow. But they've kind of abandoned research and development for something called like the vision team or something like that. I don't remember the exact terminology, but it appears from the outside that they don't spend as much time researching and developing the cards to the same degree. And so the testing there isn't the same. I mean, the way that they responded to Oko, saying that they didn't really understand how well he would be used in terms of like certain aspects of him with the Elk ability, that to me spoke of a group of people who are most likely overworked, can't do as much as they're supposed to, and have been told to focus less on developing the cards and more to push the envelope. And the more you push, the more you're going to end up with problems. That's just the nature of it, right? The new fire definition of design focuses more on big, flashy sort of things, and they want these cards to reach out into other formats. Before, they were concerned only with standard. Now they've actively stated that one of their goals is to get cards that actually matter in formats outside of standard. Now, to matter in these older formats, what did I say? The power bar level is higher. That means they have to press the power up button on these cards. That's why you see cards like Oko being good enough to make it into old school formats where they play the Black Lotus. What are we seeing with companions? They're also making the foray into the oldest formats. So, from the perspective of trying to push out into other formats, fire is totally working. The side effect is that it really is kind of a fire in that it's burning standard. It's causing cards to be too powerful showing up that require bannings. Now, there are a number of difficulties that come into this that somebody, what's the username here? The username of Doomenstein. Now, I'm not going to read out everything he had to say, but I am going to take advantage of the fact that he's summarized some good points as to why Design's job is harder now for Magic and why bannings need to happen more frequently. And there's a number of factors coming in here on top of the fire design that basically exacerbate the problem. The departure from the block release system and changing it into individual releases. And if you don't know what that means, if you're new to Magic, you're probably just used to, okay, we're on Throne of, here we are in Eldraine. Here we are in Ikoria. And it's just one set, right? Well, how they used to do things was we used to get 3 sets on each world. And actually, we recently did that with the Ravnica block, where you have the 2 Ravnica sets and then the War of the Spark, which is actually set on Ravnica as well. That was the norm, where originally you would be like, okay, we're going to Flooble-de-Gloob. And Flooble-de-Gloob has 3 sets. You have your big main set where you introduce the world to us, world building and the main concepts. Now, each of the other 2 sets that would come along would expand on that world building. They would continue the concepts that exist, but they would create new concepts as well. The problem that they found, especially with the 3rd set, you've got your first set where you introduce First Strike. Then you've got your next set and you make more First Strike cards, but you also bring in flying. Now, these are really basic themes, but it's just to give you an idea. So now the first set has First Strike. The second set has First Strike and flying. And the 3rd set brings in trample. So the 3rd set has First Strike, flying, and trample. But the breakdown across those abilities is there are tons of First Strike cards because they exist in the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd set. There are a decent amount of flying cards because they exist in the 1st and 2nd set. And the trample set is the worst one off because, the flying exists in the 2nd and 3rd set. I misspoke there. So trample only exists in the 3rd set. So trample gets the least amount of cards. It gets the least amount of time to explore its mechanical identity. Now they've collapsed that all into one set. So that one set has to show us the entire world, explore every theme that it has. And when you have 3 sets, you can spread the power across 3 sets. So you don't have it all condensed. But with one set, everything has to go in there. You have to make that set pop. Every single set has to pop because that's the only set on that world. And that puts more design constraint in that you have to push for more power. And if you have to push for more power and you combine it with the fire concept, you're going to end up with more cards needing to be banned. Another issue is the London Mulligan, and that's going to tie in with the next point as well. Now, the London Mulligan overall, I feel like, is a net positive for Magic the Gathering. It is the least random of all the mulligan styles, right? Where you have more control. So a mulligan is supposed to be a way for you to escape an unplayable starting hand with a penalty. And the penalty has always been a loss of part of your starting hand. But up until the London Mulligan, you didn't get to actively choose what you lost, really. It didn't work the same way. Whereas with the London Mulligan now, you can choose what cards go back to your deck. This increases deck's consistency. Now, this is a good thing because it really sucks when you start a game and you don't have any lands and you can't play. Getting shut out by your starting hand is one of the worst feelings in Magic the Gathering. So mitigating that feeling, it's a great thing to do. But the problem is, by adding more consistency to this, it allows for more powerful strategies to flourish. There's a little less swinginess in Magic, which basically leads to repetition. You end up with a repetition scenario where you can consistently get the same cards over and over and play the game out the same way. You'll have fewer mana curve interruptions, and that makes things more obvious in terms of cards that are too powerful, because the easiest way to tell a card is too powerful is when it's overrepresented in the meta. When a certain percentage of the deck, when you get to the point where half of the decks that are being played are featuring a card, that's a real problem. You want variation. I mean, obviously, even pushing up to 40% is really moving into the danger zone. Yeah, I think ideally, now this is just my personal opinion, but I think ideally, if something represents maybe 30% of the field, that's okay. We're talking about standard here, not other formats. But if something represents 30% of the field, that's okay. You can have 3 decks like that to form the paper, rock, scissors at the height of Magic, and then the other 10% can be some random outliers. That, to me, is about the healthiest balance you can probably achieve in something like standard. We're never going to have a glory standard where you have 15 different decks that are all viable. The card pool just doesn't allow for that. So we have a limited card pool with standard, and the representation power levels need to be somewhat balanced out. And then you combine the fact that we're living in an accelerated world for Magic. This is something I've touched on in the past, where Magic gets solved faster. If you don't know what I mean, every format has a solution in terms of what the most powerful decks are. That's just how it works. In any given set of cards, there will be particular strategies that have the highest incidence of winning. And yes, there may be some other strategy that has a strength against that, like the paper rock scenarios, but really overall, there are going to be a few strategies that rise to the top and one that's dominant. So solving the format basically is getting to those decks. Now, this process happens faster than ever. Between things like Arena accelerating the process, giving people early releases, you've got all these people weighing in online as well. There's a ton of channels now where people are making decks, breaking down all the cards. Like before a set comes out, you will find multiple hour-long guides that tell you everything about these cards, from limited breakdowns to here's how you're going to dominate in draft, all the way up to standard, here's the deck that's going to dominate, here's what's going to happen. So before a set even gets released now, it's solved. And once you get to a set being solved, it's already essentially moving into stagnation mode, where everybody knows what the top sort of tier is. And then when you add in Arena, where people are more focused on winning than anything, you get this sort of like hyper-inflated, we already know what the best cards are and the best things to do before the sets even hit the table, and we're bored of it. And this is boring, and this is warping the meta. So, I mean, on one hand, you go, okay, manage the format. Why are so many cards getting banned? What are you doing wrong? And then on the other hand, it's a monumental task. We've got to be fair. It's easy to just go, standard should just be balanced. And I do put blame on Wizards for, in my opinion, not spending enough resources on research and development and spending enough time to flesh out the playing. Like Oko coming out in the form that he did just shows to me that they're not paying enough attention. It's not like they're not paying any attention. The game isn't horribly mismanaged, but the way that they're doing things is leading to more standard bannings. And for the current time frame, with the way things are going, I don't see that changing in the foreseeable future. I do expect we are living in a new era of Magic, the Fire era of Magic, where we are just going to become accustomed to far more frequent bannings. I don't really want that to be the case, but that feels like that's the reality we're living in. So let me know what you think about that in the comments below. I've got a hilarious new video up on my second channel. I invite you to come check it out. I'll have a link in the description for you. Big shout out to my patrons and channel members. Thank you guys so much for supporting my channel. I'm having a fantastic time. We had a really fun live stream last night, and I'm looking forward to having a fun one tonight too. So you're all welcome to come on by and hang out. But for now, I'm going to head on out. So I will see all of you lovely people very soon.